Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today's video is a HP9000E Winco generator. It came into the shop for some service, and it looks like we're going to need to change out the ignition coils, do a full tune-up on it. Thankfully it makes power, and I just wanted to comment on how damn heavy this thing is. It's got to weigh close to 450, maybe 500 pounds. It's just insanely heavy. But the cool thing about it is that it's got the Briggs & Stratton Vanguard 16 horsepower on this, and it's only 8,000 running watts, which is interesting because this is heavily overbuilt for the running wattage that it is rated for. I've taken the top cover off to kind of inspect the inside. I was going to do a tune-up, but I immediately stopped because I found a ton of oil here inside where the air cleaner goes. And you can see where it was actually spitting up the oil back into the air box here. And ironically enough, this guy bought the generator came with the house, and it doesn't look to be that bad at all. In fact, it probably was rarely ever used, but it does make power, but it is having a hard time idling and keeping speed. And it's going up and down a little bit, which would indicate a carburetor problem. But it would seem that we have to dig a little bit deeper into what's going on with this engine. I may have to actually do a leak down test on each of the cylinders to see what's going on. But let's pull the spark plugs and see what we find. Well, before I even really dive much into this, let's take a look at the spark plugs. And so far it looks like they're not that old. And then this one here, they look about equal, but the customer complained that this thing is not running right. It will run smoothly for the first few minutes, and then once it warms up, it actually starts to struggle. It starts to misfire, not backfire, but misfire. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a compression test, and I've already done some inspection camera on this side. So let's look at the inside of that. I don't know how well you can see it. I'll try to get rid of the glare. That's the inside there. It looks like it's been burning oil on this side a little bit. And we have a little bit of vertical scratching, but not terrible. I don't know if that's cylinder 1 or cylinder 2. That's the one that the compression test is connected to. So let's do a compression test and see what we get. Now I'm pretty sure this has a compression release. I'm not sure, but let's see what we get. Okay, so we are getting 150 psi on this cylinder. That's very good. Let's check out the other cylinder. So we're going to do a compression test on, I'm going to call this cylinder 2. Again, I don't know if it's 1 or 2, but this is the second cylinder on this side. And I'm not liking what I'm seeing in here. You see the vertical scratches inside there and a lot of wet oil foul stuff on top of the piston there. And okay, so that's the top of the piston and the valve head on this side. And we're seeing a lot of carbon buildup here. It looks like it's been burning oil. And yeah, I think that's from the other cylinder. That's the other cylinder. And then that's the other cylinder vertical scratches. So you can see this other cylinder with the 150 psi has, got some carbon buildup, but not too bad. But the other one here has got a lot of oil buildup on top of the head where the valves are. There's more of that there. And the vertical scratching is pretty bad there. It's the best clear picture I was able to get of it. And you can just see how it glistens, which tells me that the oil is still pretty fresh. The other thing too is that the oil is about halfway down and very dark. But let's do the compression test and see what we're getting here. Thank goodness for electric start. Just under 75, so more like 70, maybe 68. Yeah, that's definitely low compression. So the next thing I'm going to do that may be able to tell me what's going on, could be valves, could be rings. What I can try to rule out is by using what's called a leak down test. We definitely have a problem with this cylinder. I'm not going to do it for this side since I know I'm getting really good compression, but let's check on this side and see what's going on. Well, this is not very encouraging at all. So what I've done is I've removed the recoil to hold the piston at top dead center on the compression stroke so that it doesn't go anywhere. And what we're seeing here is without the glare, pretty good amount of leakage here. And I hear it coming from the oil dipstick here and a little bit from the exhaust. So what that's telling me is not only do we have some valve problems, but it looks like the piston rings are also not sealing properly. And well, that's stinks. So looks like we got a pretty bad engine here, unfortunately. It runs, but doesn't run very well, unfortunately. Here we are, it's a new day. Didn't want to give up, so started to dig a little bit deeper into the engine, and I pulled the valve covers off to see what the engine is doing. To correct myself from before, this is cylinder 2, and then this is cylinder 1. And it actually has the numbers right there. So cylinder 2 had very good compression, cylinder 1 did not. And typically what I've seen happen with a lot of these overhead valve engines is that if they have solid tappets in there, they need to be periodically adjusted, and if you don't adjust them, as the valve starts to wear and recede into the head, it takes up the valve clearance right here, and it will cause the valve to not completely seat properly, and that's where you get the loss of compression. And these are a little bit tight, and it actually starts to make sense because the engine will run fine, everything's cold, but then once the engine heats up and expands, those push rods get slightly taller and takes up whatever clearance is left, and if it's not allowing the valves to completely seat, that is likely where the misfiring is coming from. Now what I've done is that I've just loosened this one up as much as I can. This is the exhaust valve on cylinder 1, and just made it as loose without it being too sloppy, so that I can know that there's no issue with the compression release mechanism, which does exist on these Vanguard engines. The camshaft has 4 lobes, 2 for the intake and then 2 for the exhaust, but the exhaust has a ball bearing inside, and then where the flywheel gear is, there is a flyweight that will fly out of the way and then allow those ball bearings to recede into the lobe. That way you can get the full compression. And I'm not seeing this bump correctly, and it may have to do with the valves not being properly adjusted, but I do see it here. But the problem now is, where can I get all that compression back? If the engine's been running like that for any length of time, where the exhaust valve specifically, hasn't been seating properly, it can burn that seat and then I'll get no compression. But let's check it out here. That exhaust valve is very loose, so I just only want to crank it a little bit, and before we got about 68 psi, maybe a little less, and let's see what we get now. Much better. In fact, that's very close to exactly what I got here. So it looks like we have some valve adjustments to do, and then I'll have to rerun the leak-down test to see how much blow-by we're getting. It's still, even if I can get the valves fixed, it still doesn't account for all the oil that I found coming in from the breather. We'll have to look into that a little bit deeper. Okay, we've gone in here and readjusted these valves to be between, the spec says between 4 and 6 thousandths of an inch. I went middle of the row, so I went 5 thousandths of an inch. And what we're going to do, that's a lot of glare. We're going to rerun the leak down test and see how we're doing. And here we are with the leak down test. It looks like we are getting just a little over 20%. I want to say maybe about 23-25% leakage, but that is in the low range, which is good. I don't hear anything from the carburetor. I don't hear anything from the exhaust, and then I do hear a tiny bit from the dipstick. But that's normal. What I am noticing here, so that, if you notice, the needle moves a little bit because I'm tapping on it to release some of the pressure. I'm looking at the exhaust now. It looks to be pretty consistent. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but I'm thinking that I might have gotten lucky with that exhaust valve seat, because if it's sealing up well at this level, I wonder if running the engine, burning off some of that carbon would help to get that pressure up a little bit higher. But even still, I'm much happier with the results I'm seeing. Let's check out cylinder 2. And here's the leak down test for cylinder 2. It looks like we are a little bit higher, but still in the good range. I'd say more like around 30% leak down. But here's what happens. I'm going to zoom out here. I don't hear anything coming from the muffler or the carburetor. I do hear a little bit from the blow-by past the rings, past the dipstick, and on the other side of the valve cover that's off, but that's not to be expected. These are adjusted to 5/1000ths of an inch. So now what I'm going to do is just so now I get a little bit better. Just a tad bit better. It's that exhaust valve for sure. And then it settles back down. So it's almost equal to cylinder 1 there. And I really think that it's the carbon buildup on the valve head there that may need to be addressed here. But let's do a compression test on each of the cylinders, and then I'll make a call here as far as if I need to pull the heads or not. Right now I'm really liking those numbers, but I wish it could be better. But it is a machine from 1997. Can't really expect much better considering the age. So let's try the compression test. All right, I actually wound up giving the battery back to the client because he had just purchased it. So I'm using my jumper pack to crank this over. Now let's check. I'm also showing you the spark plug testers to make sure we have good spark, but let's check out the compression now on cylinder 2. So about 140 psi, which is good. And again, I did check to see that the compression release mechanism was bumping the exhaust valves, and they are bumping it, so there's nothing wrong with the camshaft, thankfully. Let us check cylinder 1 for the same compression. And here's compression test on cylinder 1. And it looks like we're about 110, and that looks good. I think we're ready to put this back together and fire it up. So in the next segment, I'm going to put it back together and then get a load on it, but I'm not going to be able to do it right off the bat here because it's got some unique plugs. We have a 5-50R receptacle. I believe it's wired for 120 volts. And then you have a 6-50 amp R, which is basically got these two prongs reversed in their position, and then a very unique non-NEMA, a CS6369 locking plug. And the mate for this, the male version of this, is the CS6365. This is an 8,000 watt generator. It has got a 35 amp double pole breaker that is a square D, which is actually pretty cool. And I just looked under here. Generator neutral is isolated from the frame. So this was definitely meant to be connected to a main panel somewhere. But let's get this engine back together and see how well it runs now, if at all. Hey guys, just a quick interim update. I did get the machine back together, but right now my priority has been to take care of a winter snowstorm here. I'm getting all my machines prepped, and it looks like we're going to get at least a couple feet of snow, which is always fun. But the good thing is that I did get the engine running. It actually runs strong, far better. I did an oil change and with an oil filter, and I also put a 1500 watt load on it, and it ran it fine. But what I found was that it was running very lean. The exhaust was getting a little red, not too much, but when I pulled the choke out about halfway, then the machine ran smooth as anything. And that's likely just the carburetor issue. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the carburetor apart and put it in the ultrasonic cleaner, and that hopefully should solve that problem. Then we're going to do a really good proper load test on this. You know, whether I have my 5,000 watt here, and then I have my 7,500 watt here that I still have yet to open. But I still have to wait for this plug, the CS6369. It's made as the 6365. Once I get that, then you will see the next segment of this video. Here we are with the machine broken down. I have the blower housing off. I just got the carburetor back together and ultrasonic cleaned. I did have to take off this intake manifold in order to get the 2 bolts off, which is one here and one behind here. There's no way that you're going to be able to get to it. I was able to save all the gaskets, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 here. The only gaskets I did have to replace are the ones on the cylinder head. So this one here and this one here. These bolts need to be tightened down to 16 foot-pounds each, and this is a 1/2 inch bolt. Now, I did have this adjustment idle screw here I did have to take out, and I believe this was out about 2 3/4 turns, but that might be a little different for if you ever work on this engine, but I know I'm going to have to fine-tune it. Just know that I had to take this out, and it was about 2 3/4 turns to remove it. Or that's how much it was in here. So you turn this all the way in, about 2 3/4 turns, and you back it out from there. Got all the linkages back together. The choke is ready to go. And going to put the blower housing back on each of those bolts. I believe are 1/2 inch as well, and they're torqued to 7 foot-pounds. All right, and here is the engine all put back together. And what we're going to do is now we have to get a proper load bank to test this generator out. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. But just to cover off on this, just be aware that these are 10mm bolts for the air intake. The 10mm are for the fuel pump. There's 2 on the bottom, 2 on the other side, and then you have a 13mm on top. And when we load test the generator, we will be able to adjust the running speed with this here. Counterclockwise decreases the speed, clockwise increases the speed. And if we have to adjust the low idle, then it'll have to be adjusted over here, or we could adjust it at the carburetor. Also, we will have to take this out here, or actually it's got a hole and you can't see it, but this is where that idle screw is. Now there you can see a little better. So that gives us a convenient way to adjust that once we get the engine running. Here we are in the basement, and the way I'm going to load test this Winco genset here is I'm actually going to use my new 7,500 watt heater here, and I got this for $100 US. Much cheaper than you would normally find it. And the quick story is that the gentleman that I bought it from, he ordered a completely different heater. They sent him this one in error, and rather than him sending it back, they said, keep it and we'll send you another one. And he sold this one for pretty much a profit, but these go for a lot more money than $100. So I'm glad I got it. Some of the things that I like about having these heaters is not only are they multi-purpose, you can heat the basement or anything, but they're great for testing generators. I think they're a very good analog to test at 240 volts, a 5,000 watt resistive load, and then another 7,500 watts, giving me a total of 12,500 watts of resistive load to test pretty much any size generator. Now, the only thing I don't like about this one for the generator testing purposes is that it's got a digital controller, and it's only got 2 settings, either low or high. The low setting is 6250 watts and the high setting is 7500, whereas the 5000 watt has no digital controller. It's just a simple knob, and it's got either a 3, a 4, or a 5000 watt setting via a toggle switch. And that to me is much more versatile, and that's the one I'll use more often because most generators that I see are in that 5,000 watt range. But if I needed more power, I certainly have this, and I will be making a separate video of this all wired up through a proper sub panel here, and with some very thick 4-gauge wire that I can interchange out the different ends. And that's where I'm kind of running into here. So this particular one, I'm wiring up this 8-gauge, it's a 4-conductor with the 4th conductor is a ground, and I've put on that CS6365 plug here, which is it's rated up to 50 amps. It's very, very hefty here. And CS, I found out, stands for California Standard. And I guess they're just using California. I don't really know too much about it. I don't see this end on many portable generators made today. Again, this machine is from 1996, 97 timeline, so maybe that's what they used back then, but these are still in use today, thankfully. I got that for about $27. And all I'm doing is just wiring it up, and it's actually pretty complex inside here. I'll just give you a quick look inside, and again, I'll make a separate video on this, but all it is running on 240 volts. It's got a ground, and in this case, the neutral is not used, whereas that 5,000 watt, the neutral is used to run 120 volts to the fan. So in the next segment here, I should have this all put back together, and we're going to go and connect it up to the Winco generator. And once I know that engine is running the way it needs to, then we're going to start with the low setting and then go straight to high, and that will be pretty much 100% full load on that generator. It is a capacitor excited rotor and stator combination, and I'm not sure if those capacitors have been changed out. If they're from 1997-ish, then they may need to be replaced, but we will see how well it handles a full load. All right, we have it outside. It's running, and the first thing I did was I had to adjust the idle mixture. So start off with turning it all the way in and then turning it out 2.5 turns, and that should get you in the ballpark. Right now, this is all the way in, the choke is wide open, and this is running really nice and smooth on both cylinders. After I did that, then I had to go and adjust the low idle. They call it the conservator on this one. You're going to see, you're going to have to take this nut off. That'll take this plate off, and then there's a nut there, and then another nut on the inside, and you can adjust it to pull it away from the governor arm, which is hard to see. It's underneath the exhaust pipe. So now, if I shut it off, idles right back up, no problem. If I turn it back on, energizes that coil. It's a little bit faster. Usually I like to get them at 48 hertz, but I'll settle for 50 hertz. It is a little bit difficult to get to since it's so close to the exhaust pipe. You don't want to burn your fingers. Actually, it's pretty close. 48.9 hertz. I'm happy with that. And if I go and turn off the idle, .62. Now I'm going to load this up at 6250, which is the low setting, and I happen to have, if I can get it out of my pocket here, the remote that runs this. And the cool thing about it is that even after you shut off the heat, it's got a digital microcontroller inside. It'll actually run the fan until the coils cool off to where it's safe. I don't have that with my other one, so I thought that was pretty cool. Hopefully, when I set this to low, it should load up. So here it goes. That's low. Seems to have taken the load okay. What are we at for? Alright. I don't want it to go below 58 hertz. And that's not at full load. We may have to do some adjustments on that governor. But it's taking the load. And let's check for speed. This is a capacitor excited end that may have, there's 3 capacitors inside to be exact. Those capacitors might be a little worn, but it's taking the load. About 85–90% of the load. I could go and adjust this up a little bit. Let's go to high. load up a little bit. And now it's a little low. So at full load, this is essentially at full load. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. Shouldn't see any less than 58 hertz at full load. It needs to go up just a tad bit more. Again, we'll probably have to check that governor a little bit more. More. That's full load. Not going to be worried about the 500 watts left. This thing is fully loaded. But it's running. Alright, it's running at full load. No stumbling or anything. Sounds pretty good. We're going to go set it back to low. We'll start doing a cool down process. So right now you can see it's set to high. Goes down to a lower setting. Now if I hit the off button, and you see the temperature gauge as it goes down, it's still running the fan. (63, 64 hertz). That's kind of not a little bit faster than I wanted. We have a governor sensitivity issue. It's still a little bit high. We're going to have to adjust this a little bit. I can set the unloaded speed, which is really what you want to do. 62.5, 62 hertz. That's about as high as you want it to go. Well, it looks like we're going to have to look at that governor setting a little bit more closely. But the great thing is that it's running very smooth. I'd say that's a minor adjustment. And once this gets down to a safe temperature, I believe that's in Celsius. Let me see if I can convert it over to... Oh, that looks like a timer. Let it count down. It should shut down and the low idle should kick in. And there it is. Alright. Well, I'd say this is a good test. We'll have to make another minor adjustment. Let's take a look at that governor and see if we can adjust it. I just shut the machine down and I'm very happy with how it's running. And I actually consulted with James Condon on this one because he's worked on Vanguard engines before. And what I can see here is that, so you can adjust unloaded speed here. And then there's your turn barrel that adjusts the linkage underneath it. And let's see if I can get a better focused in. So you see the two spring locations. That small spring is the anti-lash spring that connects to the carburetor linkage. And then that bigger spring is what connects to the governor arm. And there's usually on the governor arm different holes that you can put this into, and I don't really see that there. I'm actually trying to get a good picture of it now with the camera. I'm just not seeing it, because normally you can make the governor more sensitive based on where the spring is connected to. I don't believe this needs a zero governor adjustment where you would actually loosen the pinch bolt that I'm showing you right now and then turn that governor rod that goes into the engine to get it to be in its correct position. I think the engine runs great. Because this lacks a stepper motor, and the stepper motor, what it'll do is it's actually assisting the mechanical governor. So the mechanical governor is going to keep it anywhere from, say, 63 hertz and say the lowest point is 58 hertz at full load. But it needs that amount of travel, because what the stepper motor is going to do is going to take the place of this, and it's actually going to keep it in that range of 60 hertz, 59 hertz, within 2%, say, of that 60 hertz setting. And it also will allow the engine to go to a low idle if there's no load. Instead, they've put in a magnetic solenoid there to do that job. I think this is going to be the best that I can get as far as speed under load is concerned, because I just don't see a way to make the governor more sensitive. And that's not really a big deal to me. I mean, as long as it can handle the load, it just handled 7,500 watts, no problem. And I'm very happy that it can, after all the cylinder valve issues that I was going through. But I would say that this is a good running generator. I'm going to get this back together, and we'll sum up my final thoughts on this. Well, guys, I'm going to call this done. This project has certainly been interesting, to say the least, but I'm glad that it turned out good. We got the engine to run very smooth, got the engine valves all taken care of, no more red hot exhaust, and no need to choke it to run properly. We were able to test it all the way up to 7,500 watts, and while it does draw it down all the way to 58 hertz, that's still an acceptable range considering the amount of power that you're able to produce with this machine. And as long as you're between 58 hertz and no more than, say, 63 hertz, that's usually the range that most of these portable generators are going to run in anyway. And this machine is no exception. I still think that it's a little bit cumbersome for an older machine to have this kind of plug. While you can still get it, most portable generators these days are going to have either the L1430 for 30 amps, or they're going to have a 1450 receptacle. And the 1450 receptacle is very similar to your oven, for example. The ovens will typically be at least 40 amps. A lot of times they're breakered for 50 amps. And that's what you'll see for a 50 amp receptacle, not this CS version, which still is a very heavy duty build. And I'll keep it as an adapter for any machine that I come across that has this particular outlet. But other than that, if there's any questions, please let me know. Leave a comment in the description below. And again, please subscribe. Any questions? Thank you so much for supporting the channel. It really means a lot. And till the next project.